Welcome back to Jesus Dead or Alive. We're on to episode 13, Changes. This new faith sparked off dramatic changes in religious customs. In obedience to the fourth of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20:8 through 11, Jews observed the Sabbath as a day of rest and worship. Yet the first Christians, who were almost all devout Jews, abandoned the Sabbath and met together on Sunday, the first day of the week, Acts 20:7. They did this to commemorate the day on which Jesus rose from the dead. There is no parallel in history, but a simple illustration reflects something of the same principle. On May 9, 1945, my native island of Guernsey was liberated from German occupation, and my father was among huge crowds who saw those first British troops land. When I returned from Guernsey 3 months later, I had been a wartime evacuee, I could have never convinced my father and the thousands who saw it happen that the liberation of the island had never taken place, nor in the years that followed could I have persuaded them that the annual Liberation Day service held in St. Peter's Portstown Church celebrated a non-event. There were other significant changes. For almost 2,000 years, circumcision had been the sign of entry into the family of God. The first Christians immediately replaced it with baptism, and Paul explains why. We were buried, therefore, with him, Jesus, by baptism into death, in order that, just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. Romans 6:4. Overturning 20 centuries of tradition was a massive move, and it was the resurrection of Jesus that brought it about. Again, for centuries, Jews had kept the Passover feast to commemorate the liberation of their forefathers after 400 years of slavery in Egypt. But those early Christians replaced it with what is now called Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper, or the breaking of bread. This was instituted by Jesus at a final meal with his disciples, when he explained that the bread and wine symbolized his body and blood, then said from then on they were to do this in remembrance of me. Luke 22:19. Soon we find the early Christians doing so regularly, with glad and sincere hearts. Acts 2:46. The Christian Sunday, baptism, and the Holy Communion are all linked to the resurrection of Jesus, and none of them makes any sense without it. As someone has rightly said, the Christian church has resurrection written all over it. The ongoing legacy. Today, there are over 2 billion professing Christians in the world, and the number is growing by thousands every day. This represents impressive growth, which in China, Korea, and South America is redrawing the world's religious map. Yet the progress of Christianity has not always been steady. There have been great forward surges, such as the 16th century Reformation and other times of awakening and revival, but also periods of serious decline and shameful episodes such as the notorious Crusades from the 11th to the 13th centuries. Yet the Christian movement continues to grow, and despite its wobbles and weaknesses, it has been an immense influence for good throughout the world. When we think in historical terms about the foundation of schools, hospitals, and institutions to care for the homeless and destitute, the abolition of the slave trade, or improving the conditions of those working in mills and mines or suffering appalling conditions in prisons, no organization did more. Today, Christians around the world are shining examples in caring for the blind and the deaf, the orphaned and the widowed, the poor and the hungry, the deprived and disadvantaged, the homeless and helpless, the sick and the dying. Many people of other religious faiths, and some with no declared faith at all, are involved in similar commendable work, but no other group contributes more to human well-being, and none has a better reason for doing so. Why sacrifice anything to meet the needs of others, if in the long run humankind is doomed to extinction, and nothing we do will make any eternal difference? The impetus driving generations of Christians in the service of others has been the assurance of the resurrection of Jesus, which has given them a dynamic love for others that has no equal. If the resurrection never took place, it is difficult to explain all of this, or even how the Christian church got started at all. As the American preacher D. James Kennedy put it, The Grand Canyon wasn't caused by an Indian dragging a stick, and the Christian church wasn't created by a myth. The evidence for the resurrection of Jesus has convinced many eminent men well qualified to assess the truth. In a document found among his private papers, Lord Lyndhurst, one of the greatest minds in English legal history, wrote, "I know pretty well what evidence is, and I tell you, such evidence as that for the resurrection has never broken down yet." Lord Darling, a former Chief Justice of England, concludes, "There exists such overwhelming evidence, positive and negative, factual and circumstantial, that no intelligent jury could fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection is true."